Welcome back to the Quarterly Call. All content discussed here is for informational purposes and is not investment advice. Please consult with a qualified professional before making any investment decisions. All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into Mobileye's Q3 earnings. And, they're obviously a leader in driver assist technologies, things like lane keeping and adaptive cruise control. But they're also, pushing for those higher levels of autonomy with their SuperVision, chauffeur, and drive products. It's a tough market out there. Global car production is kind of sluggish. Competition is fierce, especially in China. And there's a lot of uncertainty about, how quickly those more advanced and pricier systems will catch on. So I've got Mobileye's press release, their earnings call transcript, and a few analyst reports. And so let's dig in and see what these results tell us about Mobileye's strategy and what it all means for the future of autonomous driving.
Yeah, so one thing that stands out right away is that while revenue is down 8% year over year, it's actually up 11% from Q2. So that suggests that, despite the headwinds, they are showing some resilience.
Yeah, let's break it down a little bit by region because it looks like things are very different depending on where you are in the world.
Absolutely. So the CEO emphasized that shipments to their top 10 customers, who make up 80% of their volume, they actually outperformed the overall production decline of those automakers.
Wow. So even in a down market, they're gaining share with the big players. What's driving that?
So it seems that Western automakers are really sticking with Mobileye for the long haul. They've secured these long-term ADAS design wins with all of their top 10 customers, many extending into the early 2030s. So that gives them a pretty solid foundation in the West, in contrast to China, where we see a different story.
Yeah, and the transcript did mention some struggles in China. Shipments to Chinese OEMs were down over 50%. That's a big drop. What's going on there?
It really boils down to China's push for homegrown technology. Even if it means higher costs, there's a clear preference for local solutions. And the CEO actually highlighted the case of Zeekr, which is a Chinese EV maker that switched from Mobileye's SuperVision system to an in-house system.
So even though Mobileye might be a more cost-effective option, national pride and control over technology are sort of winning out.
Exactly. It really highlights the pressure that they're facing in China. They're up against not just market forces, but also government policies and that nationalistic sentiment that favors local companies.
So China's a challenge, that's pretty clear. But what about those advanced products, SuperVision, chauffeur, and drive? Are those gaining traction?
So that's where the picture gets a little bit murky. They do have active discussions with 9 out of their top 10 customers for these advanced products. And none of those discussions have gone negative in the past 90 days, which is a positive sign. But, they haven't given us specific timelines or volume estimates, particularly for SuperVision in 2025.
So a lot of potential, but also a lot of wait and see. They're not giving us concrete numbers. What's the holdup?
Yeah, part of it is just the inherent uncertainty surrounding these advanced systems. Automakers are still evaluating the technology, consumer demand, and of course the regulatory landscape. And that's constantly evolving.
It makes sense. I mean, automakers need to be sure that these systems are safe and reliable and profitable before they go all in. What about Mobileye's own investments? I mean, they seem to be betting big on their IQ6 chip as the foundation for these future products.
Oh, absolutely. They believe that IQ6 is a real game changer. It's designed for those really demanding computational needs of eyes-off driving.
Yeah.
And they see it as, really ahead of the competition.
And it also sounds like they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. I mean, they're investing in imaging radar as a crucial, complementary technology.
Right. They see it as essential for safety and performance, especially in those challenging conditions where cameras alone might not be enough.
So they're building this sort of multi-layered approach to autonomous driving. But how does this all translate to their financial outlook, especially with those, headwinds in China? I mean, can they weather the storm if things get rough?
Yeah, that's a key question. And even with all the uncertainty, they are in a strong financial position. They have $1.4 billion in cash on hand. And they project that their operating cash flow in 2025 is going to be higher than 2024.
So it sounds like they have a decent cushion to fall back on. Are they just sitting on all that cash, or are they actively managing costs?
No, they're definitely taking steps to streamline their focus. Remember that the decision to discontinue internal LiDAR development, it was a tough call, but it shows that they're willing to prioritize and allocate resources strategically.
That is a bold move, especially in a field where LiDAR has been considered by many to be, kind of a crucial sensor. What's their rationale for that?
Well, the CEO explained that, they believe that their combination of cameras and radar, coupled with their advanced AI algorithms, offer a more cost-effective and scalable solution for achieving higher levels of autonomy.
So essentially, they're doubling down on their existing strengths
Yeah.
and betting that their technology can kind of leapfrog LiDAR in the long run.
Precisely. And, they're backing that up with substantial investments in R&D.
Okay, so we've established that they're facing some headwinds in China, but they're also making significant progress in ADS and these next generation autonomous driving systems. What's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, the big thing on the horizon is their Capital Markets Day in December.
Right.
They're promising to really lift the curtain on their technology roadmap and provide a deeper dive into their progress. So it'll be a chance for them to show investors and the industry how they plan to, maintain their leadership in this very rapidly evolving landscape.
It sounds like a critical moment for them to showcase their vision and address some of the uncertainty surrounding their future. Particularly their approach to those higher levels of autonomy and how they plan to navigate the Chinese market.
Absolutely. This Capital Markets Day is going to be a key indicator of their confidence and their ability to articulate a compelling story for investors.
Oh, so we've got a lot to unpack here. Mobileye is walking this tightrope between, maintaining their dominance in ADAS and pushing the boundaries of autonomous driving. But with these, challenges in China and the rapid pace of innovation in this field, the question remains, can they stay ahead of the curve?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, and it's one that's going to keep us all on the edge of our seats.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating, isn't it? They're really, trying to navigate this evolving landscape, balancing that established business they have with ADAS, with, those aspirations for full autonomy.
And that kind of leads us to the competition. The analysts in the earnings call transcript were really grilling them about how they stack up against, rivals like Tesla, who are, charging hard into that robo-taxi space.
Yeah, and it's not just Tesla, right? You've got a whole bunch of startups and tech giants all wanting a piece of that self-driving pie.
So how are they planning to stand out? They mentioned this thing called compound AI in one of the sources. What's that all about?
That seems to be, their secret sauce, or at least that's how they're presenting it. They describe it as, this blend of different AI techniques that they think is really uniquely suited for self-driving and all the complexity that entails.
Can you break that down a bit? What makes it so special?
Well, think of it as a layered approach. They're not just, relying on the latest, the flashiest AI models that everyone's talking about.
So it's not just ChatGPT for cars.
Not exactly. While they are incorporating those cutting-edge models where appropriate, they're also leveraging, years of experience in computer vision and those more traditional, rule-based systems.
So it's kind of merging the best of both worlds. You get the adaptability and learning capabilities of AI, but also that dependability of the more traditional engineering methods.
Yeah, you got it. And Mobileye believes that this gives them a real advantage, especially when it comes to safety and precision.
They also kept mentioning mean time between critical intervention as a key metric. Can you explain what that means and why it matters?
So it boils down to how often a self-driving system needs a human to take over, in a situation that could lead to an accident. The longer the time between those interventions, the better that system is performing, basically.
So the longer the car can drive itself safely, the higher the score. Essentially, what kind of numbers are they claiming?
Well, with the current SuperVision system, they're saying they're already seeing intervention rates measured in hours, and they're aiming for thousands of hours with IQ6.
Wow, that's a huge jump. But how do they measure that? Is there some kind of standard test?
That's a great question, and it's a complex issue. They admit that there isn't really a single universally accepted measurement method, but they are planning to release a detailed safety report, soon. And they say that will address their methodology and how they define these critical interventions.
So it's not just a matter of counting how many times the driver grabs the wheel.
No, it's much more nuanced than that. You have to consider the types of failures, whether they're reproducible and whether they're what they call black swan events, those unpredictable situations that no one could have foreseen.
So you wouldn't want to penalize a system for, a sudden hailstorm or a flock of birds on the road.
Right, exactly. It's about understanding the context of those interventions and really evaluating the system's overall performance.
Okay, so more clarity is coming on that front. But what about the specific use cases? We've talked about SuperVision, Chauffeur, and Drive. Are those targeted at different markets or levels of autonomy?
They are. Each product represents like a different stage of autonomous driving, aimed at different types of vehicles and driving scenarios. So SuperVision, which is their most mature product, is already being implemented by, some Chinese automakers and the Volkswagen Group.
And that's more like an advanced driver assistance system, right?
Mm.
The driver still has to be paying attention and be ready to take over.
That's right. But it offers much more sophisticated features than your typical ADS. Imagine like hands-free highway driving with automated lane changes.
Okay, so ADS, but like supercharged.
Mm.
What about Chauffeur? Where does that fit in?
Chauffeur takes it, a step further towards that full autonomy. It's designed for eyes-off driving in, specific conditions, like highways or within, geofenced areas.
So you could, like, theoretically take a nap while the car drives itself.
Well, not quite yet. The regulations around eyes-off driving are still, kind of evolving, but that's the ultimate goal.
And then Drive is the most ambitious one.
Yeah.
Right, that's full self-driving for like robotaxis and delivery vehicles and things like that.
Exactly. Drive is their long-term vision for, a future where transportation is fully automated. That's where a lot of the excitement is and the uncertainty, of course.
Yeah, it sounds like full self-driving in all conditions is still a ways off. Are they making any progress on that front?
They are. They're investing a lot in R&D, testing their systems in various environments and, collaborating with partners to develop the necessary infrastructure. But as you said, it's a complex challenge and it'll take time.
Okay, so lots of moving pieces here. It seems like they're kind of playing this long game, trying to establish themselves as a leader in all aspects of autonomous driving, from that basic ADS all the way to fully autonomous robotaxis.
Right, which raises the question, can they really manage that balancing act?
Yeah, I mean, they're essentially competing on multiple fronts against, some pretty tough opponents in each of those markets.
It'll be interesting to see how they allocate those resources and whether they can maintain that technological edge as the pace of innovation, continues to increase.
And speaking of challenges, let's go back to China for a second.
Yeah.
We talked about their struggles there. If they're losing ground in, the world's largest car market,
Yeah.
will that affect their global ambitions? They mentioned something about building REM in China. What is that?
So REM stands for Road Experience Management. It's their crowdsourced mapping technology, and it's essential for both ADAS and those higher levels of autonomy.
So like a super detailed Google Maps for self-driving cars.
You could say that, but it's much more dynamic and detailed. It uses data collected from, millions of Mobileye-equipped vehicles to create this real-time map of the world. It includes, lane markings, road signs, even potholes.
That's incredible.
But
Why is China so important for REM?
well, to be truly effective, you need tons of data. And China, of course, has that largest car market in the world.
So if they're not able to collect as much data in China, because of these local competitors, could that hurt them?
It could, yeah. But they are still collaborating with partners in China, and they believe that they can build a really robust REM system that spans the globe.
So REM is definitely something to keep an eye on. It could be a major advantage for them as this market for autonomous driving matures.
Mm.
What about the regulatory landscape? How does that factor into all of this?
Oh, regulations are huge. In fact, they mentioned that the regulatory environment is actually creating some tailwinds for ADAS.
Really? How so? I would have thought more regulations would just make things more complex and expensive.
Yeah.
And potentially slow down adoption.
Well, while that can be true, in this case, the regulations are pushing automakers to adopt more sophisticated ADAS systems.
So instead of just meeting the bare minimum, they're kind of being encouraged to go above and beyond.
Right. Exactly. And that's where Mobileye excels, right? They're already the leader in ADAS, and they're well positioned to meet those stricter requirements.
So they're actually benefiting from the regulators raising the bar for safety and performance.
And in a way, yeah, it's creating a bigger market for their higher end ADAS systems.
Okay, so regulations are a bit of a mixed bag, but not necessarily a bad thing for them in the long run. What about partnerships? It seems like they're working with a whole lot of different companies.
Partnerships are essential to their strategy. They're working with automakers, tier 1 suppliers, mapping companies, even, ride-hailing services.
So they're kind of building this whole ecosystem around their technology.
Exactly. they know they can't do it all alone, and that collaboration is really key to making their vision of autonomous driving a reality.
So it's not just about building the best tech, it's about having the right partnerships and a sustainable business model.
Absolutely. It's about, creating this network of collaborators who can, bring their expertise and resources to the table to accelerate, the development and adoption of autonomous driving technology.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. They're juggling a lot, navigating the complexities of the Chinese market, staying ahead in that ADS game, and pushing the boundaries of full autonomy.
Yeah.
But the big question is, can they turn all of this into financial success? Can they translate that technological leadership into sustainable profits?
Yeah, that's the big question. And to be honest, the answer is not clear yet. There are a lot of unknowns, especially when it comes to the timing and adoption rates of those higher level autonomy products.
Yeah, those are big unknowns, but we can look at their fundamentals, right? I mean, they have a solid track record of profitability. They're a cash-generating machine, even in this tough market. I mean, remember they generated $126 million in operating cash flow just last quarter.
That's true, yeah. But they're also investing, heavily in R&D and new technology. So how do they balance those investments with maintaining that profitability?
Well, they're being strategic about it. Remember their decision to shut down internal LiDAR development. They're focusing their resources where they think they have a clear advantage.
It's a balancing act, that's for sure. Investing for the future, but also maintaining profitability in the present. That's why that Capital Markets Day in December is going to be so important. They need to show investors that they have a clear path to making money from these advanced technologies.
And they're going to have to answer some tough questions. What kind of pricing power will they have? How will they scale up production to meet demand? And how will they address those concerns about China? I mean, can they still be a global leader if they're losing ground in the world's largest car market?
All good points. That Capital Markets Day could be, a make or break moment for them. But even beyond the financials, there are bigger questions to think about. What does Mobileye's success or lack thereof, tell us about the future of autonomous driving?
Yeah, are we really on the verge of a self-driving revolution, or is it further off than we think? And what role will companies like Mobileye play in shaping that future? I mean, will they be the dominant players, or will they be overtaken by, the Teslas and Googles of the world?
Those are the questions, aren't they? But hey, that's what the deep dive is all about.
We're here to give you the information you need and the insights so you can, understand these complex issues and form your own opinions.
So there you have it. Mobileye's Q3 results, well, they were a mixed bag, but they're definitely not out of the game. They're making bold moves, they're innovating, and they're clearly determined to be a leader in this race to autonomy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, unfolding in front of us. One thing that stood out to me from the call was how they, emphasized that they haven't lost any of those advanced product engagements in the last 90 days. That's got to be a good sign, right?
Yeah, it is encouraging for sure. It suggests that, even with the uncertainties and the competition, automakers are, still seriously considering Mobileye solutions for those, higher levels of autonomy.
Yeah, but like we were talking about earlier, those deals, they aren't, finalized yet. It's still a lot of potential, but no firm numbers. So what's it going to take to turn those engagements into, actual contracts and revenue?
Well, I think there are a few factors at play here. Automakers they're looking for proof, right? That these advanced systems are not just technologically feasible, but also commercially viable. They need to see, clear evidence of safety, reliability, and scalability, and of course a compelling business case.
So it's not just about building cool tech. It's about showing that it can be, safely and profitably integrated into mass-produced vehicles.
Exactly. And that's where that Capital Markets Day in December is going to be so important. It's their chance to address those concerns, head on. They need to provide, more concrete details about the technology, their partnerships, and really their go-to-market strategy.
So it sounds like they need to paint a pretty compelling picture to convince both investors and automakers that they're the right partner for this autonomous future.
Yeah, definitely. They need to showcase the progress they've made, address the challenges and really articulate a clear vision for how they, plan to navigate this rapidly changing landscape.
One thing we haven't really touched on much is AI and the impact of all those AI advancements on their future. I mean, we're seeing crazy progress in areas like machine learning and natural language processing. So, I mean, how do they see all of that shaping this autonomous driving landscape?
That's a really great question, and it's one that, Mobileye is actively addressing. Their compound AI approach, which we talked about earlier, is really designed to, incorporate those latest AI advancements while also leveraging, their existing expertise.
So they're not afraid of embracing new AI techniques, but are they doing enough to really stay ahead? I mean, so, some people say that they're too focused on their existing technology
Yeah.
and not moving fast enough to really embrace the latest breakthroughs.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I mean, the field of AI is moving incredibly fast, and any company that doesn't, adapt, they risk being left behind. So Mobileye needs to, demonstrate that they're not just iterating on what they have, but really exploring and integrating the latest AI innovations to stay competitive.
So it's a tough balancing act, leveraging their strengths while also embracing new possibilities.
For sure. And that's what makes this such a fascinating and unpredictable, story to watch unfold.
All right, so as we kind of wrap up our deep dive on Mobileye's Q3, what are the key takeaways here for our listeners?
Well, I think, we've learned that they're facing some headwinds, particularly in China where the local competition is really intense. But they're holding their own with Western automakers and making significant strides in both their ADAS business and their push for those higher levels of autonomy.
And they're making some pretty big bets, particularly on that IQ6 chip and that compound AI approach. And their capital markets day in December, that's going to be a really pivotal moment for them to showcase their progress and really convince investors that they have a winning strategy.
Absolutely. And, beyond the numbers, there are some really big questions that are still out there. Can they maintain that leadership as this whole landscape of autonomous driving evolves? Can they successfully deal with those challenges in China while also expanding globally? And can they actually turn their technological lead into real sustainable financial success?
Yeah, those are questions that only time will tell, but it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Totally agree. The race to autonomy is really heating up, and Mobileye is right there in the middle of it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Quarterly Call. If you enjoyed it, make sure to rate and follow our show. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.